So, I'm really happy to welcome you all here to this event. It's called Living with Loss. We're hosting this event as part of National Grief Awareness Week. And when I say we, I'm representing Irish Hospice Foundation. And our vision is that no one should experience dying or bereavement without the care and the support that they need. So we're hoping that for those of you who have experienced bereavement either very recently or some time ago, that this event will bring you some of that care and support. We're really pleased as well that Fanagans funeral directors are supporting us and sponsoring us and providing this service and have done for a number of years now. So thank you to Fanagans. Now, I suppose that there's to some extent maybe a poignancy or a sadness for some of you being here this evening in a way you would probably prefer not to be here. We're calling this National Grief Awareness Week, but we're also very cognizant of the fact that some of you are acutely aware of grief and because you've experienced your own loss. You're probably on your own in your own space, in your own house, or indeed in a place where you don't want to be. I guess what I want to reinforce this evening is that while you can't see other people there, over 600 people registered to be at this event. So while you may be physically alone and feeling isolated on account of your bereavement, we just want you to know that there are some other people in this country who have some inkling of how that might be. And we're building just a space for you to come into. We're going to run the event this evening in we hope, a gentle way. And there's going to be a number of parts to it, whereby you'll hear different people talking, giving their expert opinion on grief, but also we'll be hearing from some people who will give us readings. And we're going to have a panel of questions and answers. And those questions will be questions that some of you had given to us when you completed your Eventbrite registration. We're going to try and get to them, as many of them as possible, but we may not get to all. So what we would ask is, if you feel you're not getting what you need, do call our Bereavement Support Line and you can talk through your question in more detail. And the line is open during the weekdays, 10 to 1, and we'll be giving you the number through this webinar. Let's see where we're going to go then. We obviously want to, as I said earlier, there's a notion that one of our themes today is that you're not alone. And we know in the work that we do that there are so many different voluntary organizations and services out there who provide comfort and support to people who've met bereavement in many different ways. And what we've done is invite some of them to be here this evening and to light a candle and to show us that little piece of light, and really symbolizing some hope at a dark time. And to formally sort of open our event this evening, we're going to ask those services to turn on their cameras and to put a little light into our space. And we have many different organizations here, and they're supporting people who've met grief and loss in many different ways, who've maybe lost children, partners, who they provide support to people who have experienced sudden death and tragic death, as well as more expected deaths. So a lot of variety here. And I'm going to just tell you, I'll name the services and you shall hear more about them later on from my colleague Amanda. We have A Little Lifetime, Anam Cara, Bernardo's Bereavement Service, Bethany Bereavement Service, Cry, Embrace Farm, Féileacáin, which is the Stillbirth and Neonatal Death Association of Ireland. We have First Light, Hope Space in Galway, and we have a hospice representative from St. Francis Hospice in Dublin, and our hospital representative is Galway University Hospital. We have HUG, peer group support for those bereaved through suicide, the Irish Childhood Bereavement Network, Irish Hospice Foundation and the Bereavement Support Line. We have Pieta House, we have Purple House, we have Rainbows, and we have Turas Lecala. So thank you all for coming and for putting up your little symbol of hope here with us. We might just take a little small time to just sit in silence. Thank you all. And we'll be aware that you're all there in the background with your candles lighting as we go through this evening. So thank you. You can turn off your cameras at this point. And we're going to move into, I mentioned we'd have some talks. So we're going to move into the first of those talks. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce to you my colleague here at Irish Hospice Foundation, Catherine Tierney. And Catherine's a psychotherapist by profession, and she's also our clinical services manager for bereavement. And she coordinates and runs the Bereavement Support Line here. So, Catherine, it's over to you. Thank you.
Everybody see that okay? Yeah. Thanks, Orla. It's always such a lovely introduction. I'm going to sort of follow Orla with just some information that I hope is useful to you, and especially towards the end. I just have 15 minutes, so I'll give you as much as I can. But what I would say is don't worry if it's too much to take in. Don't worry if you just it washes over you. Whatever will land will land. And remember that you'll get the slides afterwards, and you'll be able to, and you'll also get loads of useful information in the resource pack. So and the image there really says it all, doesn't it? It's a really, this is a heavy topic, and it's a sad topic, whether you're bereaved now or in the past, or whether you're supporting someone who's bereaved. It's a sad topic. So just to, above all, mind yourselves and look after yourselves, and especially when this webinar is over, to really just mind yourself. So I'm going to cover as much as I can in the next 15 minutes. You know, the grieving process, what's it all about? What happens if you've got a complex relationship? So it's not somebody that you would deem a loved one, maybe, you know, somebody that really made your life very difficult. What are the myths? It's really important that we understand what the myths are about grief, and what the understanding, the correct understanding we have now, because there's so much more known about grief. What helps us in our journey in coping with grief and loss, and what are some of the hidden losses? So that's really important, because if they're hidden and we don't get the support we need, that can really complicate things. And again, what supports are out there, because that's very important too. So let me just move on if I can. This is a lovely poem by a woman called Rachel Naomi Raymond. And I suppose the key piece of it is she talks about grieving allowing us to heal allowing us to remember with love rather than pain. And I just love that. If there's one thing to take away from tonight, is that the grieving process, which is an active process, it's something that we really have to work at. It really helps us to remember our loved one with love rather than pain. And she talks about one by one, you let go of the things that are gone and you mourn for them. And one by one, you take hold of the things that have become part of who you are, whether you wanted that to happen or not, and you build again. And that forward facing piece, looking to the future, it's just a lovely little poem. I just wanted to mention this because sometimes we think about grieving and the grieving process and our loved ones and how much we loved them. I know there's probably some of you that are listening now who are maybe thinking, actually, the person that died made my life a misery. It might have been somebody who was abusive or violent, or an alcoholic family system where things were really quite traumatic and difficult growing up. It might have been a narcissistic parent. So sometimes relationships are very complicated. And just to understand that there's so much loss that's involved in that sort of a childhood, because really, when we do the work around processing the death of that person, we're processing the pain, we're processing our own losses, the loss of the childhood that we should have had, maybe the loving parent that we should have had, maybe the stability and the security that we should have had. So we're grieving for ourselves as much as anything, and we're processing the pain and the impact. And what I would say, if there is complication in your grieving process and in the relationship that you had, counselling really can help, but I'll talk about that later. So we'll talk about the myths about grief. I've got the big X signs, so you'll forgive that. But one of the myths is if you don't cry, you're not grieving. And it's so interesting. This is quite subtle. You'll see people at funerals and you might hear somebody saying, God, they mustn't have loved their mother that much. Nobody's crying. Or, maybe they're a bit cold, I don't see anybody crying, or they seem to be quite just emotionless or hard. That can sometimes be a judgment, especially of women who don't cry. And sometimes there's the opposite. If a man is crying at a funeral or around those rituals, there can be a sense of, oh my God, he's not holding himself together. So these judgments are very subtle and sometimes they're quite unconscious. And so the big X is really just to say that grief is expressed and felt in so many different ways. So on the right-hand side, I talk about, grief isn't just tears, it's not just emotional, it's also felt really physically. Some people can talk about feeling nauseous or sick or have trouble eating, they don't feel hungry, they've issues with the digestion, they don't feel as if they can sleep, their sleep is disturbed, they might have nightmares. Cognitively, people will often say that they're all over the place, they're completely confused, they can't concentrate. They sort of feel, sometimes they ring us on the bereavement support line and they might say, I kind of thought I was going mad. So it affects us emotionally, physically, cognitively. Some people might feel that they have a sort of a crisis of faith, where's God in all of this? How did he let this happen? So the impact is on so many levels. Grief is exhausting, our whole world is upended. But I suppose on the left-hand side there, I wanted to mention, there are different grieving styles. I'm going to come to that in a minute. One is a sort of intuitive style where it's an emotional grieving. The other is an instrumental style, which is more about channeling your grief through practical, action-oriented. And those people, they tend to grieve in private. So it's really important to know about that, to know about the different grieving styles. But I'll just talk about the cultural conditioning very quickly in family culture. And even if you are bereaved, is even to ask you, when you were growing up, how did your family deal with grief and loss? How did your family deal with painful um, situations? And sometimes in Irish families, the culture was to say nothing, to sort of, there was a sense in our family of drive on, as quick as you can, put it behind you and move on. And I think about the cultural conditioning. I know my dad, when my mother died, my dad was whenever he got upset around, and in our family the word was upset around us kids, he would apologize. He was so embarrassed for crying, and he'd leave the room, and you'd know to leave him on his own for a while because he was so embarrassed at the idea of showing his feelings and crying in front of us. And that's sort of a good example, maybe, of that sort of cultural conditioning. He came from a farming background. He left home early. There's no man in his family ever shed a tear publicly in front of each other. They were big farming men. So that sense of sometimes the straitjackets that can really impair how we grieve because we're so conditioned to hold things in when really what we need to do is let them out. So that's just, I guess, an important piece. The myth number two is experienced the same way by everybody. And now what we know is that people experience grief and loss depending on a whole range of factors, their coping style, their relationship with the deceased, and cultural practices. And if you pick through all of those, it's almost like the grieving journey is a bit like our fingerprints. They're quite unique to everybody in that we'll navigate them depending on our coping style. You know, I'm a good coper. I'm a poor coper. I don't cope well with change. I cope quite well with change. I'm resilient. I'm not resilient. How ready was I for this loss? Was it sudden? Was it tragic? Was it unexpected? Or did I feel actually I was ready? You know, my loved one has been dying for a long, long time. I was really ready for them to go, or I wasn't ready at all. It really took me by surprise. The nature of the relationship is a complex one because, as I mentioned a little earlier, it could be that the relationship was very fraught. It could be that there was an estrangement there or a lot of conflict that you mightn't have spoken to that person in years, or the opposite. That person might have been the core person in your life. They might have been the person that you were really dependent on or that you loved, you know, the most important relationship in your whole life. So there's so much, there's such a range of factors that can be at play here. The third last thing there is simply to say that if there's other losses and you've had a bereavement now, but there's other losses that you didn't process before that haven't been processed, then they will also sort of ricochet around and resonate with this loss. So you might have a bigger experience of loss than really you expected. And there might be other stressors. There might be a sickness in the family. You might be having to move house or have your own ill health. So there's co-stressors that can complicate how we navigate the grieving journey. And just to mention, because we're such a multicultural society now, there are so many different cultures now, and they have different ways of grieving, different practices, different rituals. That's really important to also recognize. Um, this idea of there's a right way to grieve, we know now, all of us know that there is no right way, that grief is so personal. And you think about that fingerprint. But just to mention this piece about the grieving styles, the intuitive grievers are the people who they want to talk about their feelings, they want to reminisce, they want to cry, they want to laugh, they want to really discharge their grief emotionally. And if you look at the right-hand side there, the instrumental grievers are the ones who they want to pour their grief into an action, something practical. They might do set up a charity, they might do fundraising. Remember there was a story of a man, and I have a picture of it in my head, even though I haven't seen this location. But this man whose son was in a road traffic accident and it damaged the boundary wall of the family property. And the father was out there rebuilding that wall with his bare hands. And you know, family and friends were coming over saying, "Look, it's all right. We'll help you. We'll do this for you." But actually, he needed to discharge not just the grief, the anger, the roller coaster of feelings that he had. He needed to actively channel that into something practical and action focused. And often the thing that's forgotten is that those instrumental grievers, they are grieving, they're really hurting, but they're grieving in private. They might do a lot of their crying in private. So this is useful because sometimes in families, in relationships, this can cause a lot of conflict because you might have one part of the partnership looking at the other and saying, "Do you not care? Why are you not crying? Have you no feelings?" And it's the other person is maybe doing a lot of their grieving in private and just grieving in a different way. So it's good to know that. This idea of stages and the stage theory, that it still pops up in print and on the media. So just to know that there are no stages. Grief ebbs and flows, which sounds gentle. It also sometimes floods. It also is sometimes people might describe it like a tsunami of feeling. So there's no stages. It's certainly not linear. I put this little picture on the right-hand side there, you'll see how grief actually works is that sort of scribble and squirrel. And that's why people sometimes say, look, I don't know whether I'm coming or going. I'm all over the place. I kind of think I'm going crazy. One minute I feel that I'm okay and I'm doing okay. And the next minute I feel like I've gone backwards because I'm bawling. So that sense of we can be ambushed by grief or flooded by grief just out of the blue. And it's just a roller coaster. And we really talk about that in the sort of the acute phase of grief, which I'll talk about the early sort of phase of grief, sort of about 6 months as a rough rule of thumb. And we'll talk about the stuckness, that if you really get stuck in that roller coaster and that really not functioning beyond the 6 months and beyond that, is it time to maybe talk to your GP? And just for people who are thinking about, well, what about timelines? And, can you give any sense of that? Just to say that sometimes what people will say if the second year was even harder than the first. So the first year had all the firsts, but it also had the funeral and maybe a will and maybe probate and maybe family conflict. Sometimes the second year, when everybody's forgotten that you're grieving, and maybe if you have adult children and they have families, maybe they're moving on with their life. But sometimes the second year is harder. It certainly can feel a lot harder for people who are on their own for the first time in maybe 50, 60, 70 years. There's another bit that says that maybe people in old age, they're used to it, they're resilient, they've suffered so many losses, they've sort of gotten used to it. And we know from our own experiences, we know from our parents or our grandparents or older people that we know that sometimes they carry a lot of unresolved grief because when they were growing up and when they were maybe early in their marriage, they had no idea how to navigate grief if they lost children, if children died, if they had miscarriages, if their parents died. So some of them have grief that they've never ever processed, and that's just important to remember. Might be in the mix of their journey, but also as they age, there's lots of hidden losses. So we know that for many people, there's a loss of health, there's a loss of physical health, there's a loss of independence, a loss of autonomy, and that can be really, really hard for older people, a loss of freedom. Sometimes people choose to go to a nursing home and sometimes they haven't a choice. And that can be really hard because they're leaving everything behind and really have a sense that they're leaving all their autonomy behind. Hidden losses are also, remember one man called the line, he talked about he felt like with his wife he was living with a stranger because she developed dementia, and just the sadness of that for him, that he lost her before he lost her. Estranged families, family conflict, these are all hidden losses that older people can also be grieving and suffering. So what helps us? We know for sure, and if there's something that you take away more than anything else, it's this idea of dosing. The dual process is how we know that Mother Nature built into us this internal process that's in us, it's intrinsic, is that if we want to grieve healthily, what we do is we dip in and we dip out of grief. We don't dip in and stay there because that's just too much for us and it's too exhausting. We don't just emotionally grieve all the time, that we need the balance. And that's a really important word, that we dip in, but then we dip out. So the emotional grieving might be a sense of even making a date with your grief. Sometimes we'll say that to people, make a time and sit and allow the emotions to surface. It's so, so important. And then there's a time to pay the bills, do the shop, have a shower, go for a walk, do the practical things that have to be done, put the bins out. So it's dipping in and dipping out. And it is a healthy sort of wise mechanism because it brings balance into our life, that we're dipping in and dipping out and we're not getting stuck. Because if you think of that seesaw there, if you get stuck on the left-hand side, which is the emotional grieving, you may not get out of bed. You may just decide that you just can't function and just stay there. And that's a stuck place on the left-hand side if you spend too long there. But also if you avoid the emotional grieving altogether and you just focus on the right-hand side, you pour yourself back into work, you become a workaholic, or you just keep active as if you're running ahead of it, you're also going to get stuck, and that's problematic. So this idea of the dual process, the dipping in and the dipping out, and this idea of dosing, that it's good to dose your grief. You can't grieve all the time. I mentioned a little bit earlier the acute grief, you know, that sense of the ball of wool, the tangled ball of wool, and how exhausting that is, and maybe how confusing and sometimes frightening that is. And some of the things that go with that are intense yearning, sometimes physical symptoms. People can feel sick, they can just feel, they can have headaches, they can feel tightness in their chest. You know, there's so much that goes with the physical side as much as the emotional side. The shock, the disbelief, sometimes guilt, the rumination, you know, thinking about the person who's died and just wanting it not to be real. Concentration, can't concentrate, that idea of cognitively just seeming to be impaired. And this is a piece that sometimes comes up, you know, what's the point about, you know, continuing on? What's my purpose? Where is the meaning in my life after this huge loss that I've suffered? Who am I now if you're suddenly widowed, or if you've lost a child and maybe it was your only child? Who am I now? Am I still a mother? Who am I now? So there's a huge amount even in terms of those existential pieces. And sometimes it's really good to talk to somebody, talk to family, talk to friends, you know, talk to somebody on the line, just to process all of that. There's such a huge amount going on, and to mind yourself because it's really exhausting. These images are helpful too because on the left-hand side, that sense of the acute, anything goes. There's a great woman who's done a lot of research in the States on complicated grief, Kathy Shear, and she talks about that acute um, phase as being akin to madness. You know that you nearly been sucked into the vortex. It's just a all over the place roller coaster time. Um, and this sense of an active process to move from active to integrated grief, that sense that we've somehow integrated this huge loss into our lives. And there's something about the integration. How do we know that we've integrated that loss? And we know when we've accepted the reality, this is real. The person is never coming back. I'll continue to have a sense of them in my life and my relationship with them, reminders of them, um, maybe talking to them from time to time, seeing them in the kids and grandkids or in special places that you used to visit, that sense of an ongoing connection. But the reality that they're physically gone, uh, twinned with the sense that actually I've worked through this really difficult grieving process, and I have a sense that life can go on, and very importantly, that life can have meaning. Meaning making is essential to the process of grieving. So meaning making and making sense of the loss and finding meaning um, in your life going forward without your loved ones. These are not easy things. These are difficult things. And one of the things that I suppose only in working with the Irish Hospice Foundation, this realization that, you know, it's an active process. You have to actually work at it. It just doesn't happen passively. William Warden did a lot of work on this and he talked about the different tasks. And without going into them too much, that sense of facing the reality, allowing time and space for the emotions to surface, that idea of making a date for those emotions to sit with and allow them, adjusting and adapting to a world that you didn't want to be changed like this. And then that sense of the continuing bonds. How do you stay connected with your loved one? Last year, I talked about continuing bonds and remembering my connection to my mum through a lot of the dishes that I still have of hers, which is amazing after all this time, and they're still in working order. But that sense of how do we stay connected with the loved one, the person that we miss in our lives, and we stay connected through the reminiscing, the talking about them, maybe special places that we used to visit with them and revisiting them. There might even be meals that they loved and recreating those meals. But that also that sense of legacy. What is their legacy for you and for your family? And it may be the values that they gave you. It may be just so much richness that might be left behind, that's carried on in the family, in their honor, in memory of them. The Maria Callas pieces that I thought I'd for the purposes of balance bring in my dad. So my dad came from Tip, as I say, farming background, left school really early, came up to Dublin, very little education, but somebody introduced him to music, classical music, and to opera, and he loved Maria Callas. And whenever I hear Maria Callas, whenever I even the movie that's on with her now, I think of my dad, and I can picture him with the two cassette tapes that he played again and again and again, until sadly our little Jack Russell ate one of them. He chewed on one of them. But these are funny memories, and sometimes continuing bonds is also remembering the funny little stories, the stories that the family remembers. Do you remember this about dad, or remember this about granddad or granny? These lovely stories that are sometimes very sweet, sometimes happy, and sometimes bittersweet, but they're important. Some grief isn't obvious, so I won't go into this too much, but to say that there's a great website called whatsyourgrief.com, where you can talk about and find more about ambiguous loss, which is non-death losses, where the person is present but absent. And we talked a little bit about dementia and Alzheimer's, where the person is there, but in a different way, they're absent. Ambiguous losses. And then other losses like disenfranchised grief, where it's not always recognized as a loss, and you might even not recognize it as a loss. One of the things that is often disenfranchised in our society is pet loss, and it's a lovely thing to know that people can call our line if their pet has died and they're absolutely devastated, and they can call our line and get support for that. I bumped into a man the other day, and his dog has died after almost 20 years, and the dog was almost as old as their son, and they're absolutely devastated with the loss. So that sense of these disenfranchised losses that we have, and that sometimes don't get the support, and if they don't get the support, it's hard to process them. So that's just important to say. What to say to someone who's bereaved, and I suppose the thing to say above anything else is whatever you do, say something. Don't avoid them. Don't dodge. If you're in the supermarket, don't sort of duck around to another aisle or something, or hope that the person hasn't seen you. And to just have the courage to be able to say to somebody, I just don't know what to say, or I'm so sorry. And the important thing is the sincerity, like to really mean it, because whatever you say, it's actually the tone and the sincerity that they'll hear. The words don't matter so much. So even if you don't know what to say, it's okay to say, I don't know what to say. Um, but we'd also recommend, if you're going to say to somebody, what can I do? It's really good, because they may be completely all over the place. It's really good to say, would you like me to? Would you like me to drop over something? Will I put out the bins? Would you like me to walk the dog? Would you like me to hoover the house? Um, can I do the garden for you? Do something practical but suggested, because they mightn't come back to you with suggestions, because they've more to be thinking about and more to be processing. Practical support is a great thing. Um, I love this image, just to say that if you're wondering, God, I don't know if I need counselling or not, ring the Bereavement Support Line. The volunteers are grief trained. They really know their stuff. They know grief, and they know this landscape. So if you're not sure, ring and talk it through. What I would say, if you are 6 months or more after a death and you really feel I am not functioning, I really haven't shifted at all. If there's not even a chink of light, if you really feel I'm really stuck, you know yourself, talk to your GP to get the support that you need. You can call the line to talk it through too. And we can signpost you, which is a lovely thing, to counselling services in your locality. There are free services, there is low cost, and there are private counsellors that we know are grief trained. There's some guidance there, which is really very helpful. I'm wondering, Derval, I'd say I've gone well over. Sorry, just to say the Bereavement Support Line is there for you all the time. It's Monday to Friday, 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock. It's for people who are bereaved, people who are supporting bereaved people, and for professionals. And there's just some information there that's helpful to you. So I hope that was useful. Mind yourselves, most of all, grief is exhausting, and I hope some of that was helpful to you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And boy, you really distilled so much of, I guess, what's known objectively, or some of the facts around grief, and you really put a lot of the complexity out there and thank you for sharing your own stories. And your parents are very vivid in that presentation. I'm thinking when we get to questions and answers, we'll be able to pull maybe some more wisdom from you. And thank you for doing that. And just to remind everyone that all the material that Catherine presented will be emailed on. Thanks again, Catherine. We're moving into I suppose the story part now, and I'm going to invite my colleague Kieran Stewart, and Kieran is going to do a reading for us, and he'll give us a little background as to why this reading and what's important about it in his view. So thanks for helping, Kieran.
My pleasure. Good evening, everyone. By way of introduction to the piece that I'm about to read, Nick Cave is an Australian singer-songwriter who in 2015 lost his teenage son Arthur in a tragic accident. And then in 2022, he lost his eldest son Jethro. He's been very open with regards to his grief, both in interviews and through his artistic endeavors. And in 2018, he set up something called the Red Hand Files, which is an online portal whereby people submit questions to him and he responds. And I know that this week the 311th post from the Red Hand Files went out, so it's been going on for a very long time. The piece I've selected this evening, I chose for two reasons. One being just the achingly sad and beautiful aspect of the dad's question. And then within the answer, the idea that grief is tidal. So it comes at us, it recedes, and then it comes at us again. So this is from issue 22 in January 2019. 3.5 years ago, I lost my wife and I was left to take care of my then 2-year-old daughter. She's a happy little girl, but I know she's happiest when her father is happy. I've been finding it hard to find happiness. It's not my loss. I've made peace with that a while back. I just haven't found my life again. You're a happy man. We all get that vibe when we see you play live. Has it always been this way? Have you always been able to cut through the heavy moment in life to enjoy living? William, Brooklyn, USA. Dear William, thank you for your answer. Please, thank you for your question. Please accept this answer in the spirit that it is given, as a simple and supportive response to your letter. It seems to me that you are reacting entirely appropriately to a devastating situation that has ransacked your life. This is not what you signed up for when you got married, to be alone and looking after your little daughter. When you said that you have made peace with the death of your wife, this may on some level be true, but the residual feeling of aloneness, loss of control, and cosmic betrayal must still hold a powerful sway over your life. No wonder you can't find your life. The life that you once had does not exist. You have a new life. 3.5 years have passed for both of us. We feel we should be better. We feel equilibrium should be restored. We feel we have in some way failed and that we should have made peace with the world. We feel people must be sick to death of us and our grief. But grief is beyond our control. It is omnipotent and invincible, and we are minuscule in its presence. And when it comes for us, all we can do is kneel before it, heads bowed, and await its passing. But as you know, grief is also tidal. In time it can recede and leave us with feelings of peace and advancement, only for it to wash back in with all its crushing hopelessness and sorrow. Back and forth it goes, but with each retreating drift of despair, we are left a little stronger, more resilient, more essential, and better at our new life. I can feel those tides of anguish and restoration move through your words. They say so much about grief, but also the sanctity of fatherhood. What a glorious thing fatherhood is. Within your words, William, great hope resides for you, for your daughter, and for all. Nothing, of course, happens fast enough, and we just want to be returned to that complicated life we once had. We want stability restored, but it is not to be. Now we have a new life, uncharted, uncertain, beyond our control, and that we are on some level undertaking alone, even within the company of ones we love. Our worlds are still raw and new. They hum with suffering, but there is immense power there too. We are alone, but we are also connected in the personhood of suffering. We have reached out to each other with nothing to offer but an acceptance of our mutual despair. We must understand that the depths of our anguish signal the heights we can, in time, attain. This is an act of extraordinary faith. It makes demands on the vast reserves of inner strength that you may not even be aware of. But they are there. As your little daughter dances through her father's tears, she leads the way. The way lies there before us. With love, Nick.
Thank you so much, Kieran. And thank you to someone like Nick Cave to put such words on experience that I think many of you will be resonating with. And Kieran, thank you for choosing that particular reading, because it definitely picks up on the sense of movement that Catherine described in her presentation. So we are challenged with this work, but to have faith in that movement. In the work of grief, there is movement, and what waxes will wane. Thanks, Kieran. We focus a lot on adults in our work, and in Irish Hospice Foundation, we often say that within a family, there's somewhere there will be a child, and we really need to automatically focus on how are the children managing this grief. We're lucky to have on our team Sonia Rennicks, who's the Childhood Bereavement Manager and also the lead for Irish Childhood Bereavement Network. So she's going to talk to us for a little while about children and grief. Thank you, Sonia.
Thanks a million, Orla. Yeah, so as Orla mentioned, my name is Sonia, and I work as the Children's Bereavement Manager with the Irish Hospice Foundation and with the Irish Childhood Bereavement Network. So I just wanted to let you know, if you don't know already, that one of the things the ICBN, the Irish Childhood Bereavement Network, do is to provide information and signposting to anyone who's supporting a bereaved child. So that could be parent, aunt, uncle, teacher, guard, whoever it is. So have a look at our website. We are going to share all of this at the end and in the follow-up email, so don't worry about noting anything down. And don't be afraid to get in touch. I chat to lots of different people every week, and I'm very happy to do that. So when you get in touch by email, you'll get myself or Dervla, and we will follow up with you. So I know most of you here tonight are bereaved, and you may be looking for ways to navigate your own grief. But as Orla said, many of you here will also have a child or children in your life who are grieving too, and you'll be looking for information on how to support them too. It might be your own children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, neighbours, or you might work with children, you might mind them, you might care for them, whatever it is. Hopefully I can provide a little bit of information. And I guess on our team, and Orla has alluded to, kind of, we would often say, think adult, think child. So to remind ourselves that where there is a bereaved adult, or where there is a death, there's a high likelihood that there's a child being affected too, a child grieving. So we have only 10 minutes, but we will send you on information, and our website is packed full as well. So don't worry about catching everything. So I guess to start with, it's important to recognise that children of all ages grieve too. Their grief is just a little bit different. Those differences show up in how a child understands death and understands the changes that are happening. They'll also have a different understanding of their feelings, so they may not fully, be able to categorize or name or put words to what they're feeling inside, and how they process and express their feelings will be a little bit different too. So in the absence of having words, children will usually express their grief in their behavior. And this changes over time, and I think that's an important thing to remember about children. So it's not really a once and done. It's a kind of a thing that they revisit as they grow older. They develop different understandings. They might have transitions in their life, and then they'll need support too. So the grief journey is a little bit longer over time for them. And I guess then, as a result of that, as a result of the differences, what they need to be supported is a little bit different as well. And we'll just have a chat about that too. So. And I know that we all want to protect the children in our lives, and the thought of them experiencing pain in any way is very difficult. But it is important to understand that we can't take the grief from them, or we can't bypass it or avoid it for them. So, but we can help them to move through it. We can be a guide. We can help clear up confusion, be a sounding board, and we can really make sure that they're not alone in their grief or don't feel alone, and we can help them to feel safe. So all of those things are within what we can do as adults in their lives. So in terms of, we talk about age and stage of development, and that plays a big role in what children understand about death. And I guess when we're talking about stages of development, they're usually linked to specific ages, but it's a loose grouping because each child is different, and each child's development journey is different, and each child's grief is different. And for children who are neurodivergent or have an intellectual disability, their pace of development is different too. And I guess parents or those closest to the child are best to understand, at what stage of development they are. So, for example, in terms of development, very young children, infants and toddlers, they'll have they won't be able to understand that a person has died, but they'll feel absence. They'll feel a difference in the routine in the house. There'll be different comings and goings, and there'll be different emotions, and children will feel that and take that on. Children that are a little older, two, I guess, right up to 6 or 7, one of the key things is that they may not understand that death is permanent. So they may search for the person that has died or expect them to return. So, oftentimes you might have something like a child one day saying, yeah, my mom is dead. And then the next day saying, yeah, so at what time is mom coming back on Christmas Day because she loves Christmas? So that understanding is a little bit different. And that's very hard to hear as a parent or an adult, but it's just that process. And they don't have the ability yet to understand the permanence of death. Children that are, let's say, from 6 to 12, they can experience what we term magical thinking. So they may create, in the absence of information, they may create their own story about what has happened and why. So things like blame or guilt can creep in there. So it's really important to keep an eye out for that. And that's where, speaking to children, telling them the truth and communicating can really help. So, for example, something as, in a child's mind, they may have had a fight with dad a week ago before he died. They might have had a fight over a chocolate bar at a checkout, or the last thing they said to him might have been "go away," and that can actually, get stuck with a child, and they may feel that they have actually caused the death. So that's what we mean by magical thinking. Teenagers as well. So, we're looking technically at adult-sized human beings, they have a more adult understanding of death, but they're still developing emotionally and socially, and very much need support too. So I would mention that children express grief differently, and that can look a little different. And I suppose, as adults, we tend to get submerged in the grief, and we're fully immersed in it for a while. But children dip out in and out of grief, so it's kind of an amazing ability, really, in a way. But it can often appear that a child isn't affected by death because they do that. They might return to playing very quickly. But this is kind of like an inbuilt protection mechanism in them, that they don't stay stuck in it for long, but they dip in and out of it. So they bounce back to it. So it's really important to understand that it's a dipping in and out versus it being kind of done, let's say. So they can use play as an outlet for grief as well. So it's another really great mechanism in children, that play can be that outlet for grief too. it doesn't work all the time. And what you might see, I suppose, at nighttime or quiet times, that there may be an outburst or a sense of overwhelm because the play outlet and the distractions of the day are gone. So that's perfectly normal to observe in children. And so, as I say, children express grief through behavior, oftentimes because they don't have the words, that vocabulary isn't developed yet, or their ability to, I suppose, feel emotion and identify what that is, as it hasn't developed yet. So you'll see physical and emotional reactions, fear, anxiety, low energy, poor sleep, aches and pains, really common. They may need to express emotions in a non-verbal way, so frustration, outbursts, isolating themselves a little bit, hiding, that can happen too. They may become a little bit preoccupied with other loved ones dying, and they may then become a little bit. They may need you more, so you might find them closer to your leg, than they usually would be, and maybe children that would have usually been kind of confident and outgoing, that might just regress or change a little bit. Um, but we can do a lot in helping them, even though what's happening with their behavior isn't verbal. We can still understand what's happening, and I think actually that's one of the key things we can do. We can step back and understand that the behavior could be an expression of grief, not necessarily, let's say, misbehaving or something like that. And we can give them additional outlets. We can support them with activities to express their grief, like drawing or playing or sports or all of those things. So, and we can reassure them that any of those feelings are okay to have and that they're safe in having them. They're big, but they'll pass, and we're going to hold the space while they're having them as well. So reassuring children through verbally, but also through routine and comfort is essential as well. And we can do that. We know how to do that. You're already doing that. I guess another piece that we would, let's say, get asked about a lot is, well, how do I explain death to a child? Do I tell a child that someone has died? And we would say yes. About death and grief with children is very important. It clears up confusion. It helps children process, to express themselves, and an opportunity to seek and receive reassurance. So those moments are really important. And they're not once-off conversations. So I'm sure you're already familiar with how children kind of learn. So you'll get asked the same questions. You'll be repeating information. So if you can hold out with patience for that, they're building a picture slowly. So jigsaw pieces putting together. So every time you answer, that helps them to get another little piece. So hang on in there if you can with the questions. And you don't need to give them all the information at once. And it's probably important not to. So, give them small bite-sized pieces and let them process that, and then come back and ask any questions they have. You can ask them what if they understood by what we had a chat about before. And again, you'll understand then, how their picture has been built. And don't worry if you say the wrong thing, or you feel like you weren't patient enough, or you didn't say it right. You're going to revisit these conversations again and again and again. So you'll have an opportunity to come back on it, and you can let them know you don't always get it right as well. Something that's really important is, children are concrete thinkers. They don't have an ability to understand kind of abstract thoughts, and you will, so they need things explained in clear, simple, and concrete ways. So using words like died and death might feel a little strange with a child, but actually it's really helpful for them, because euphemisms or things that soften those words can be quite confusing. So a couple of examples, let's say, so if you say to a child that a person went to a better place, they'll be like, oh, without us, well, can we go too? Well, they may think that. If you say that someone went to sleep, they might worry at bedtime about themselves or about their other loved ones. If you say, we lost granddad, they'd be like, okay, let's go find them. So they're concrete thinkers. Concrete language is going to help them understand things. So don't be afraid to use words like death and dead. And I think we may touch on this later, but we often get asked, and certainly I have definitely gotten a lot of phone calls asking where to send children for professional help. And it's important to say that the majority of children and young people learn to cope with grief within their natural context, within their families, within the neighborhood, extended family and communities. So external and professional help usually isn't needed. But I guess what I would say is add time, multiply things by time. So like adults, children need time to process their grief, and they need opportunities to express and talk about how they're feeling. But if over time you feel like your child is not really adjusting, so if they're withdrawn from family and friends and that's not improving, if they're isolating, if they aren't engaging in the activities or the games or the whatever it is that they usually love doing, if they haven't returned to that in some form of way, um, if their anxiety about their own health or about loved one's health or about dying, like a loved one's dying, doesn't begin to lift, or they don't begin to go back out into the little world away from the leg a little bit further, or if their sleep or is disrupted or they're eating. So let's say they're sleeping too much or too little, or if a child is blaming themselves, then getting some professional advice probably it would be advisable. And you can always, as I say, you can check in with us. We also have a list of other organisations that you can check in with, like Burnouters, just for a bit of advice or a bit of signposting, a bit of information. One thing I will say, that in the very rare event that a child is self-harming or talking about harming themselves or ending their lives, we take that very seriously, and we respond to it in an urgent way. So that would require a visit to the GP, doc on call, or A&E. Again, as I say, that's very rare, but important to take it very seriously if it arises. So just lastly, and I'm sorry I've taken a lot of time there. Oftentimes we hear parents say that they hide sadness from their children because they don't want to upset them. And Catherine did touch on this a little bit, but just to say that it's really important to show emotion. You're modeling for the kids. So if they see you showing emotion, expressing how they're feeling, or expressing your own sadness, that's really important. It's a message to them saying, yeah, you can express it. But it's also important to describe to them how you're supporting yourself, that it's not their job. So you could let them know who you're talking to, what walks you're going on, all the different things that you're doing. So they still need to understand that you're the adult, but you can express your grief and do that at the same time. It's absolutely fine to do that. And yeah, it just sets an environment where it's okay to come home and be really upset if they need to do that. So that's a lot of info in a short time, but in summary, I guess, remember, children grieve too. Their grief is expressed a little differently. Keep the communication going and hang on in there with the repeated questions. I know it's hard. They're building that understanding piece by piece for the jigsaw, and reassure them of their safety and look after yourself. So I had a video, but I'm not sure where we are in time, Dervla. We can send it out in the email afterwards, and we can also send out info on how to get in touch with us. Thanks, Emil.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And I think that reassurance message is just vital, and that information is required in order to reassure. And it's such a big thing for children. And in a way, it's our team for adults as well. We're hoping that some of the information today will reassure you about your own grief. And from Sonia, we're hearing that information helps in reassuring children constantly. Continuing on that theme, we're going to go to Amanda Roberts, and Amanda is going to give some further information about the range of supports and services that are out there, so that if you do want to seek extra support, she'll give you some clues as to where to go. Thanks,
No worries.
Amanda.
Thanks a million, Orla. I suppose my name is Amanda and I work at Hospice Foundation. So part of my work is liaising with a lot of the organisations that you would have seen at the start of the night. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to let you know a little bit about what's out there and how you can access it. So just before I get into the services, I'm going to allude to a little bit what Catherine said earlier, is that when we talk about bereavement care, all of us have needs after someone dies. And that can be, a lot of the time for most of us, can be the people that are around us, our family, our friends, our work colleagues, our neighbours, the clubs that we're a part of. And a lot of that group, what they give us are basically things like acknowledgement that the loss has happened. They may provide us with practical support, such as doing the grocery shopping when you just can't face going into the Tesco's or Dunnes early in grief. Or it could be the work colleague who takes that difficult client for you in your first week or two back at work. That network also provide us, or can provide us, with emotional support. So it could be the coffee and chat that you have with a friend, it could be the walk and talk, or it could be like the football game you have with your friends, that you're just having that support of that people kind of around you. Another thing that we all need as well is some level of information. And that's when the services start coming into play. And I suppose when we talk about services or bereavement services in Ireland, how they tend to be structured are some services are for all types of bereavement, whether it is a sudden death, whether it is the death of a parent or a sibling. So basically they provide all sorts of I suppose bereavement support to everyone. Other services are kind of structured in a way of how the person dies. So you might have support services particularly for people that maybe died by suicide, or died by a road traffic accident, or died through cancer. So it's related to the way the person died. Other services are structured in your relationship to the person. So some services are out there for bereaved parents or for widows. So they're kind of structured on the relationship to the person who died. And work the services, nearly all of the services out there around who provide bereavement support or bereavement services, all provide some level of information. It could be practical information. For example, Irish Road Victims Association have a really good booklet around the practical and kind of legal implications when someone experiences the death through a road traffic collision. A lot of them provide psycho-educational information. So how grief affects us, what are the different ways we can cope? A lot of the information that Catherine gave us this evening, they would have that in leaflets on our website or videos or even on podcasts. So when I talk about that sort of information, everyone kind of needs some level of information. What we find is some people would need additional support beyond that. And some of the services do provide that. So what we find is some people might feel isolated isolated from their natural support network, or they might find that they feel they need to go through or kind of process or talk through their loss with someone outside their circle of family and friends. And what services out there that kind of help that piece would be the one-to-one sessions by a grief trained volunteer, where people can talk through and find reassurance through talking about their loss. So some of the services do provide or do have that sort of support within their service provision. Other people find they might like to look to share their experience with someone who experiences similar loss to them. So that's where the peer support groups come in that some services provide, and they're generally facilitated by a grief trained volunteer, sometimes by a professional. A smaller group of people, like Catherine alluded to earlier on, have more complex needs. So there might be a lot of things going on at the same time as the death. For example, as Catherine alluded to earlier on, as well as trying to cope with the loss of someone that's close to them, they might have family conflicts, there might be financial difficulties. So everything kind of going on can become overwhelming. And so they might feel maybe accessing a more counselling service would be more helpful. Or maybe the circumstances around the loss was maybe a traumatic death, other kind of circumstances that might accessing counselling might be a little bit more beneficial to or help them unpack all that complex nature of the loss. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a slideshow at the end of the night that will give you a sense of all the different supports that are out there. And I suppose what we would kind of say to people first, if you're struggling and if you feel you do need some support, reach out to the people around you, because what you find is there's people there, they just don't know what to say or do, and they don't want to mention it. So reach out to the people around you and tell them what you need. And if you don't know what you need, say to them, I don't know what I need. I know I need something, but I don't know what I need. But just let people around you know that you're struggling, that you need something. If you'd like to go outside that network of friends and family, ring the Bereavement Support Line, what Catherine says. It gives you a chance to kind of talk through what you're going through and maybe help to find out, well, do you know what do I need? You can also contact your GP. Or after tonight, you might see a number of organizations and you might go, do you know what, actually, I think that service kind of speaks to me. Contact the service directly. A lot of them have information lines or website that you can kind of go through and get a little bit more information about it. And I think Catherine kind of touched on this earlier. Do you know what? The first service that you approach, you might find, do you know what, that's not for me. And that's okay. Don't dismiss getting support just because the first service doesn't kind of seem to meet your needs. And I suppose one people do say to us as well, when you do see these services at the end of the night, and we will send them to you later in an email next week, it might not something you avail of now. It might be something that you might avail of later on down the road, but it also, you might see something that you might think, do you know what, I know a friend or a family member that I think this service might suit them, and let them know about the service. And just before I kind of hand back over to Orla, just to say what people say to us a lot of the time, the first step is the hardest. You know, reaching out to the people around you, ringing the bereavement support line, contacting that service, but just to acknowledge that that can be the hardest step, and to let people know, look, you're not alone in this. There is people around there that can kind of travel with you on this journey. So thank you very much for listening. I'll just hand you back to Orla.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and for putting together then that information, which we'll be scrolling at the end, as you said, and which we'll be able to email on to everyone. To be honest, one of the things we find most helpful, and I think certainly for some of us and for me in my own life, and that bereaved people tell us about all the time on the support line, and that we also know from facts and from research, is that there's a very powerful way of helping and connecting. And our next person, Neil Fullerton, is going to read us a poem about that important intervention. Thank you, Neil. Over to you.
Thanks, Orla. This is The Art of Listening by Anne Tannum. I'm not talking about a half-hearted, following the words but not the meaning type of listening that uses only one ear and the occasional, oh, I see. That type of listening you come across every day of the week. No, what I'm singing my hymn of praise to is a higher form of communication altogether. I'm talking about employing all the tools at our disposal. 2 ears, 2 eyes, the heart, the gut, that place inside where compassion and empathy lie. I'm talking about a whole body receptor tuning in to what the speaker is saying, not just to their voice, but to the silence when they pause to search for a word, their eyes and bodies speaking eloquently on their behalf. Someone takes the risk of releasing the truth of who they are into the care of another, and miracle of miracles, the other reacts, reaches out with both hands, cradles the truth, blesses it with acceptance, and folds it in acknowledgement, and tenderly gives it back into the care of the one who gave it life. Now, that type of listening is rare. It's an art form, a sculptured moment of connection, inviting us to come inside and be astonished at what the heart can hold.
Thank you so much, Neil. And I wish for us all that we'd be blessed by that listening experience at some point in our lives, and particularly when we need it most. That was a lovely reading of that poem. Thank you, Neil. We're coming now to have a panel session where you'll meet some of the speakers you've already met. So Catherine and Sonia are going to join us. And also we'll be joined by Patricia and Morna and Mark, who are volunteers on the Bereavement Support Line. And we're going to ask them to just focus in on their responses to some of the questions that people sent when they were registering for today's event. And we'll get through a couple of them. So I might ask you, Catherine, Sonia, Morna, Patricia and Mark, to pop on your cameras. Hi all. And your microphones.
Hello.
Lovely. Hello, Patricia. Hello, Mark, and hello, Morna, and welcome back, Catherine and Sonia. If it's okay with you all, what I'm going to do is I'll start with a question, And then particularly yourselves, Mark, Patricia and Morna, when you're answering, you might just throw in as well an observation that you've learned from your time on the support line that you would like people to know about. So feel free to roam a little from the answer if you think there's a piece you really want people to know about. And that recurring question is coming up so many times, and it's about normality. And ultimately, how can I know what I'm feeling is normal? We've had so many questions like that. So who might like to, will I start you with that, Patricia?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Orla. My name is Patricia, and I've been working on the bereavement line since its foundation, which is several years ago. And just to say, like, what a privilege it is to listen to people who are bereaved and who just need a little bit of support and a little bit of caring listening, as we heard about in the last poem. So a lot of people will come on and say, I think I'm going mad. What is normal? Well, as we've spoken throughout this webinar, there's no normal with your grief and your bereavement. And pretty much I could say that anything that you're experiencing is normal. And really, for people, very often people will say, I can't even do a shopping list. I can't cook a meal, can't concentrate, I can't read a book. I drive across the city to visit somebody and I can't remember where I drove. And I just hope that our reassurance that these are all normal emotions, because as Catherine pointed out, grief is not a straight line from A to B. It's just like it's a ball of scrabbled wool. And that just to remember that most odd and peculiar things that you're experiencing are normal. And once that you are leading a functioning life, that you're doing most things that you need to do, the other things, they will get softer, they will get easier, but they are normal. So it's just to remember that lots of things that you may feel, pains in your heart, pains in your tummy, pains in your shoulders, your head, these are all parts of grief. So yeah, that's
okay. You may not expect them, but you can reassure that they're normal.
Yeah.
Thank you, Patricia.
Yeah.
Would that chime for you, Mark? Had you anything to add to that?
Yes, it does. I mean, the sort of pretty much most of the callers that I've dealt with since I've come online, they've always asked that question after telling their story about their grieving process. They've always asked the question, is this normal? Is what I am feeling normal? And I just like to say that when they ask that question, the reassurance they get when they say that is normal, it's very relieving towards them. They can almost hear the sigh on the line when they hear what you've just said to them, that it is normal, and that acknowledging that their grieving process is difficult, and that another thing that comes out from me talking to them as well is that very often when you talk to them, they find their own resilience. They're not aware of the resilience that they're already bringing to the table, so that just emphasizing it and using that to build on it in addition to the normality of what is going on.
Important point. And Catherine said it, grieving is hard work. Nick Cave said it, and you're saying it too. So it is hard, and we can't outrun that. Morna, anything on that?
Yeah, so hi everyone, good evening, I'm Morna, and I've been on the Bereavement Support Line for coming up on a year now. And yeah, I would say it's a through line across the calls is around, am I normal and is this okay? And not just the kind of the devastation and the sadness and all that can bring, but also often sometimes people can feel different things. They can feel maybe relief, maybe they can feel disappointment at a relationship that hasn't been the way it might have been, and so forth, like Catherine was talking about. I spoke to a man on the line who described being actually like he had 2 big losses, and he had a lot of expectation that he would feel a lot of devastation, but actually there was a lot of happiness that the people were out of pain. So that is also normal. So it's not just that devastation and sadness that's normal, but there's also, as Catherine said, your grief is as unique as a fingerprint, and that just to really allow that and to know that that's normal.
That's so important, the surprise, what you don't expect, and maybe not judging ourselves, and not being harsh about it. Another question that comes up is more specific about the feeling of guilt. And this person says, I feel so guilty. What can I do? I don't know, Catherine, do you want to lead with that? And we might unpick it a little bit.
Yeah, and then feel free to come in, everybody, after. I think one of the things, Orla, just to echo something you said a second ago, I think we can be very hard on ourselves. And I think that idea of self-compassion just can't be overemphasized. And especially when you're grieving, to really go easy on yourself, treat yourself like your best friend, because what we tend to do with ourselves is we critique and we say, I should have done more, I should have done this, I should have, and it's, really, it's almost like the stick we beat ourselves with. And so there's something about cultivating a sense of just, I really commit to just taking myself easy because this is so hard, and being compassionate and self-compassionate. And as much as you can, guilt, often when you hear about it on the line, my goodness, the person moved heaven and earth and did everything they could. And it's just something that we do to ourselves. So I would say encourage self-compassion, go easy on yourself, go gently, take yourself easy. And anybody else want to come in there?
I think sometimes you need to kind of unpack it a little bit and talk to the person about, what wonderful and marvelous and good things they did. Now, that is not really very good wording, but talk to them about the things. Like, did you sit with them? What were you able to do? And I think that very frequently a story emerges which maybe assuages the guilt a little, because people, as you say, Catherine, they start to be compassionate on themselves and say, well, actually, I really did stay up. I did stay up all night. I nursed. I did this, and so that positivity starts to, come to the fore, and we hope. Obviously, there's so many situations where it's different and it's more difficult, but certainly on the line, I think talking to the person and trying to soften the whole experience of the guilt they're feeling. Talk to them about the guilt, of course, and try and source where that guilt comes from, and then find other ways around it. I say, to make different meaning, tell a different story.
And I know, Sonia, you mentioned young people, and particularly children feeling guilty. But what about maybe coming into adolescence? Most of the line experiences adults, but that particular point in time, how do you help a young person?
Yeah, and you're right, it's a really difficult period of time. Like teenagerhood, I wouldn't do it again. So there's so much going on in their life, aside from then, having a death happen or a bereavement. So um I think it's a lot of the same things as younger children, making sure that the lines of communication are open. It's harder because you can get thorny responses, but if you can remember that need for safety and reassurance is still inside that person, that they're not a fully formed adult with fully formed coping skills, so that's really important. Um, side by side conversations is something that tends to work. So, you may not be able to go in directly to how do you feel about, dad dying or anything, but if you're sitting beside them in the car and you're driving along, or I don't know, you're at football or on a sideline, you might be able to, say something along the line, what's different for you now? So it's less direct, but it's more accessible, or maybe that's something that the teenager can engage with quicker. But yeah, just to keep an eye on them, and also lift expectations. So lift academic expectations for a while, lift sport and expectations for a while. You don't want, teenagers to totally disengage, but have a chat to the school, have a chat to the, the coach and things like that, and say, as adults, we have brain fog and we have all these things. Like teenagers have exactly the same, but probably more intense expectations because of exams and things, you know?
I think that's really good, and tailoring the
Yeah,
communication on
absolutely.
account of that.
Yeah, yeah.
This is probably the last question we'll have time for. And again, we had it repeated several times in different forms. So I'm going to go back to Maureen and Patricia, Mark and Catherine on this one. You know, these questions that cluster around, is this ever going to end? Is this ever going to get any better? What is in front of me? What do you say to that core question?
I think when I hear that, I often try to bring the horizon down to like just the week, the day, the week, the month. So we're not thinking about next year or 10 years time, the long view. Bring the view right down to like just today, just this week. Can I just do today? Can I just do what I need to do, get through? The small things sometimes are the really biggest. Just getting through those baby steps, getting through them, and really acknowledging and milking those wins. I got through today. I did today.
Yeah, yeah.
And then look no further for the moment until you can look further, and that time will come. But that's just to shrink it all down to just what I can need to do today, this week, this month.
Yeah.
That's very much echoing what Patricia said earlier as well about the guilt. It is about just trying to peel things back into bite size. Yeah. Thank you, Morna.
Yeah, I think it is all about the small things. Just echoing from what Morna was saying, is that I dealt with somebody recently who was saying that, who asked that question, does it get easier? And I sort of gave her some of her previous conversation back, that she had said she had got up this morning, she had went to the shops, and then it came in on her, so how am I going to survive this? And it's a case of emphasizing you did get up, which a lot of people find very difficult, is actually swinging the foot to get out of the bed. And then she had gone to the shops, and it's emphasizing their resilience, and that comes in over time, that it helps them get along the way.
And the patience, but as Morna said, notice what did happen for now.
Orla, you used a term the other day when we were talking, which I thought was great. You said grief flip-flops. And I thought that was great because, you're overwhelmed and then you can be okay. And I just thought that was a wonderful way of putting it, because it's very visual. It's the same as, what's it called? Meaning making and the alternative into grief and out of grief. But flip-flops is a very good way of saying, look, it really does. It comes and it goes.
It does. It comes and it goes. And we heard like roller coasters, and we heard of the tidal movement from Kieran, and Catherine, you also said about dipping in and out, and just having faith and trusting in that the dip will also rise, the flip will also flop.
And talking about it really helps. It really helps. If you talk to the volunteers, they'll often talk about this sense on the call of an arc of the call, that the call may start with where is it going to end and how am I going to go on? But by the time they've processed and talked, and as Mark said, reconnected with how well they're doing despite everything, and their coping skills and their resilience, and the wins and the small stuff, and how just well they're doing, often there'll be an arc of the call, and at the end of the call there'll be this felt sense of something been left behind on the call, and just a relief of, isn't there often that, Patricia?
Yeah,
That's the
absolutely.
sense of hope. That's the hope that we know we see it happening.
Yeah. And that's the powerful thing of listening, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Talking for the client, but listening on a phone call is extraordinarily powerful.
I think knowing as well that there is change and movement happening that you don't notice yourself. One of the other volunteers talks about keeping a journal, that she kept herself in her own grief, and actually that looking back on it, she can see like there actually is movement and change here, but it's actually So that journaling can be really helpful, or ways we can think, actually, there is movement, actually, there is something going on here, but it can be hard to maybe see yourself sometimes, but to find
Really
ways to.
so gradual. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you all for that conversation and for some really practical advice and for different ways of thinking about things and being compassionate to ourselves. Catherine, you put it right there. You know, what would you tell a friend? You know, when we often don't treat ourselves as a friend. I'm very conscious of people's time, so unfortunately we are coming close to the end now. So I'm going to thank you all for joining this panel and for sharing, as you do every time you get on the Bereavement Support Line, and as the rest of you do through your work. Thank you for doing that. And I'm going to move on really to in closing, to thank some of the people that you didn't see today. I mean, really, obviously, thank everyone who presented and read. But I'd like to thank Amanda's team, Dervla and Roisin, who did so much in the background. You haven't seen them, but the fact that this was all arranged and organised and properly run and booked is up to them. So well done. And it's just one of their activities during National Grief Awareness Week. And really, we did want to reiterate again our thanks to Fanagans for supporting this event annually. We are going to need, we will send you on some information, and Amanda has told you that at the end of our event, we will leave the screen open with some details of different services. All of that will be emailed to you as well. So just know that never feel there's nowhere to go. There's always someone to reach out to. In keeping with that idea that Catherine mentioned of compassion, we also have a request to make of you when you leave this meeting, is to do one small, good, nice thing for yourself. And it could be as simple as sitting for a moment and breathing in or breathing out. It could be making your cup of tea. It could be stretching. It could be going for a run. Whatever helps you. Make a bargain with yourself that you'll do some small thing. We said at the beginning, you are not alone. And while you might be sitting there on your own, we are reiterating there's many people here in this virtual space. As Kieran was reading the piece from Nick Cave said, and I didn't hear it the first time, I heard it this time, that we're alone but connected. And I think that is a message of hope. And we made a short video to show at the end of this session, and it's a number of people saying that phrase, you are not alone. And they're saying it in many different ways and through many different languages, because we really want to emphasize that, you know, we are a community. Our experience has brought us into being connected. And Dervla is going to pop on this video, and it's saying to us, no matter who you are, no matter where you started out, you're here now. So in closing the night, we'll move to that video, and we'll also remind you to be good to yourself. Thank you.
You're not alone.
Nie jesteś sam.
Non siete soli.
Você não está sozinho.
Nie estás solo.
Ti nisi sam.
Nie залишай се naodinci zі своїм горем.
أنت مو وحيد.
Hindi ka nag-iisa.
Du bist nicht allein.
Nem vagy egyedül.
No hi singur.
Sunt besser.
When there was no map to follow, still there were songs in our hearts. Those who sing out in their sorrow never are truly apart. At journey's end, just round the bend, watch for the light shining through. Even if only a soft glow, trust it will grow, it will bloom. There are better days to come. Don't get weary, listen for hope. There will be better days to come. Catch those raindrops, turn them to song. There are better days to come. Wait for that beautiful morning, earth so alive as she sways, everything sounding like music and echoes of happier days. After the long silence is done, the tune will be ever more sweet. Voices entwined and all rising, souls with a steadying beat, singing better days to come. Don't get weary, listen for hope. There will be better days to come. Catch those raindrops, turn them to song. There are better days to come. Wishing, hoping, yearning for better days to come. Listen, voices rising for better days to come. Wishing is a yearning, every storm for better days to come. Listen, voices are rising, drum to song for better days to come. Wishing is a yearning. When there was no map to follow, still there were songs in our hearts.